Good morning, everybody. This is Bob Kingpin Eres with another edition of Pro Sports Broadcasting. And joining me today is Pascal Marco. And Pascal Marco is the author of a brand new book called Identity Lost. How are you this morning?
I'm great, Bob. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And, I think probably the best way to open up and talk about your book is I do have a trailer of the book, and I'd like to play that right now.
In the late 1970s, in Chicago's Burnham Park, a man in his late 80s was riding his bicycle, as he did every day. He was attacked by a gang of youths wielding a baseball bat, who stole his bicycle from him and beat him with that baseball bat. An eyewitness was there who saw this attack, came forward the next day, walked 6 miles to the local police station, the Homicide District headquarters in Chicago, became the star eyewitness. Unfortunately, the cops and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office didn't get their story straight, and when they went to trial, the attackers were found not guilty. Records were sealed, and the boy had to be put into protective custody for his own good. That's where truth ends and my fiction starts. My name's Pascal Marco, and the name of my book is Identity Lost. This is the story about a young boy who sees a crime committed and who knows that he must do something about it. By doing this, he was going to cross over a threshold. His life was going to change forever if he came forward. Unfortunately, he was forced into protective custody. This ultimately becomes a story about someone in witness protection who crosses paths with the killers 30 years later, and all the drama that ensues. It's about revenge, suspense, intrigue, trust, and all the lies. I think the reason you'll like this book is because you'll be intrigued that it's a story about somebody losing their identity. A crime's been committed. There's shadows. There's the background of Chicago. Can the justice system truly protect a witness to a murder? To find out if justice is served, read Identity Lost.
And that was a trailer, and that is not only a great trailer, but that it seems like a fun book, and I can't wait to pick it up myself and read it, Pascal. And tell me a little bit about how you came about this about this story. And from what I understand, the first part of this is true, correct? A man was riding in the park and was killed.
Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me on the show, Bob. I do appreciate it very much. And I do have to thank Reese Candy, a fellow Chicagoan who helped produce that little trailer there. Reese is a longtime friend, and I thank him very much for making me look so good. But, man, let me clarify that. The book is fiction.
Okay.
Identity Lost is a novel. And the framework for the murder in my book is based upon a murder that actually did take place in Chicago back in the late 1970s. And that story just was one that just stuck with me for many, many years. I wanted to do something with the story. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. One of the ideas I had was to write a movie script about it. But, 30 years later, I got the opportunity to write a novel. I went to join a writer's group, had some time on my hands that I was afforded, and the story came up again, and I thought, you know what, maybe I can use this real crime as just the framework for the murder in my book.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about things that led up to you being the author. I know that you've written over the years, right? But not really penned anything, or I shouldn't say that. I don't want to say it like that. You've written items. I've read about your background. You started writing a blog on baseball and one of our favorite teams, the 2005 World Series White Sox. I have to tell you now, I have to bring it up because we are a sports show, but I was in the locker room when the White Sox won their World Series, and I was in Houston, and I got doused. And somewhere on that ESPN file, from what I understand, if you still have it, I'm there with them getting doused also.
Well, I envy you. I envy you quite a bit. I wasn't fortunate enough to go to the Houston games, But you know, I was a lifelong White Sox fan, grew up on the south side of Chicago, and you know, the inciting incident for me personally was attending Game 5 of the ALCS in Anaheim, and we were watching. My friends and I coined this group called the Arizona Sox Posse, and we were meeting at the Fox Sports Grill up in North Scottsdale over a series of nights, watching first the Boston series, us demolish Boston, the world champion Red Sox, 3-0 in the first division series. And then the Game 5 came along, and I said, well, I'm going to the game. There's just no way I'm not going to go to this game. The Sox are potentially going to win the pennant, the AL pennant. And only one person was willing to go with me, and that was a Yankee fan, a buddy I had made over the years. And we took off at 6 o'clock the next morning. We were told there were no tickets available at the Big A in Anaheim. Don't come out to the stadium. They had actually moved the game from a 1 o'clock start to a 5 o'clock start, fortunately for us, but we ended up arriving there about noon. As it turns out, to make this long story short, we ended up sitting in the Art Moreno's box seats with his family, just purely, I say coincidental, but I think there was something in there. Somebody was watching me from above.
So you got to see the White Sox, of course, go to the World Series, and as we all know, and I think I still have one of the corks somewhere from the bottle of champagne that was popped in the locker room that night. Got to see them win a World Series, which for me was exciting, even though I've been in sports broadcasting now for about 24 years. To have your hometown team finally in there. And of course, I grew up as a baseball fan. Now I can't say that I haven't watched the Cubs, and I have to say that I've always been a White Sox fan. And we'll drop this subject here in a bit and talk about the book. But the thing is when I was a kid, I actually had the opportunity of being a White Sox bat boy, which I turned down. and people always said, well, why'd you turn it down? I said, you know what? If I was going to be a bat boy, I couldn't go out and play baseball. And my nickname is my nickname is Kingpin, and I've been a professional bowler for 25 years. But before I ever picked up a bowling ball, it was always baseball. I mean, literally, I was a guy who slept with my glove, right? And I always saw myself playing at Old Comiskey Park, right? But that was one of the reasons actually why I never wanted to be that bat boy, which I turned down. Which now, of course, years later, I kick myself, right? But
I remember the contest that they used to have in the Chicago Tribune, and you'd have to fill out the little form and send it in. And every year, I just dreamt of what could I write. Evidently, I wasn't a very good writer then, because whatever I wrote didn't convince the White Sox management or whoever it was, Tribune Charities, whoever picked the bat boy. It was never me who got picked for that bat boy. So I commend you for whatever you wrote in that little essay they used to require you to write.
Let's just say this. We're both from Chicago.
And that's true.
In Chicago, there's one thing. It's either who you pay off or what you know and or who you know. And it just so happens is I knew somebody. And it's one of those things. I mean, I can't.
I was going to mention that, Bob. I didn't want to go there, but now that you've brought it up, that's not surprising either.
Right? Exactly. I mean, we're from Chicago, and the thing is, let's not talk about writing, and we are going to talk about writing here. But if you talk about writing with me, I have a hard time writing my name. But let's get into this book, because this book is truly fascinating, and the story is a great storyline. And you mentioned about that you were probably going to write a screenplay for it before you even wrote this book, right? And
right.
And as I went through the information that I have so far, and I will read the book, is that what I just lost my train of thought there, but I don't do that too often. But the thing is, what I was thinking is this would make a great movie.
Well, I agree. I mean, I'm certainly a little biased over that, but I think it would make a terrific movie. And they tell you when you're writing your novel, always pick out the actors for the movie script. I have those actors picked out, and I don't want to give out too much away because it'll kind of tell you what the book is about a little bit. But I had a lot of fun writing this book, and And I decided that when I was going to write it, I believed from the very beginning I was going to get it published. I had that dream. I think you have to set out that intention of what you want and say this is what you're reaching for. You always hope for the best. Frankly, I'm still surprised that it's gotten published because it's just so difficult to get fiction published nowadays. The field is just extremely competitive. But I had some people who just gave me some wonderful help. One of those people initially was Brad Thor, a thriller writer who lives in Chicago. I never knew Brad previous to starting to write, but I ran into him at a book signing of his up at Fontana, in Fontana, Wisconsin, at a place called Gordy's Lakefront Bar, and he was signing books there. It just so happened that the book he was signing was called The First Commandment, and it was a novel, and the conclusion, the climax of that novel happened on Lake Geneva. So he was signing books there, and I met him there, and I introduced myself, and he told me that if I was a serious writer, that I needed to attend this convention called Thriller Fest. And I did that, and I met him there, and he was very gracious to me. He introduced me to some people. Those people introduced me to other people, and so forth, and ultimately that was where I found the publisher for this book. And so, a very serendipitous event, but had I not seen a little placard in a library up in Fontana, Wisconsin, saying that Brad Thor, New York Times bestselling author, was going to be there, I would have never maybe, followed on that journey, on that path.
And that is a very interesting story because in life, you never know who you meet on a daily basis. And I always say that also because I try to figure out how I monetize this website here that I've put together and put so much into, and I figure that at some point there'll be someone to help me along here and guide me in the right direction too. And probably one of the best things that you did was actually to meet Brad, and Brad help you get you introduced to the right folks. And I take it one of those folks was probably the publisher.
Exactly, and Thriller Fest is a convention that happens every year now in New York City and downtown Manhattan, where the best thriller writers in the world come there to share their ideas, share their thoughts, and then, of course, people who love to read fiction. It's an open convention to the public. If you want to pay the admission fee, you can meet your favorite thriller writer or mystery writer, and so. Brad was just extremely gracious to me, as well as other authors that I've met now, Douglas Preston and John LeSpar and others who have just been, tremendously gracious when they meet a new writer. They want to encourage them, help them get published in any way they can by introducing them to people. And that little thing that Brad did for me, not little, very big thing, just inviting me was very fortuitous.
And, let's talk a little bit about the book. We don't give much of it away because we do want our viewers to go out and buy it and read it and enjoy it. But one of the reasons you're sitting out here on a sports show with me and this is a Sunday morning, of course, this interview will be available for all time, as far as I know. And the thing is that your character in here, the character that was killed, and correct me if I'm wrong, he was and this I believe is false and isn't really true, is the fact that he was a member of the last remaining member of the White Sox, or the Black Sox, as I should call them. Correct.
Yeah, In writing, you have to come up with unforgettable characters, and I wanted to use this framework for this murder that happened in Chicago, and it had always intrigued me. There was a man who was riding his bicycle in the true crime on the lakefront of Burnham Park back in the 70s, and he was attacked by a gang of youths. And there was a young eyewitness, in this case it was an 11-year-old boy, who saw the crime and who the next day walked 6 miles to the Area 1 Homicide District Headquarters on 51st and Wentworth along the Dan Ryan. That just blew me away.
I remember that.
Would do that. Yeah. Even today in Chicago, it's very difficult to have witnesses come forward when they see a crime 30 years later because of fear of retribution. So it always struck me, why would that boy have come forward? Either he felt some definite, moral obligation. I don't know how strong that could be at 11 years old. I felt he either had a very strong family values. I thought maybe he knew the attackers of the old man, or maybe that he knew the old man and he felt he needed to come forward, or maybe he knew both of them. And that's when it kind of clicked with me when I thought to myself, what if the eyewitness actually knew both the attackers and the man that was attacked? And this all kind of happened at the time that I was getting back into writing after going to that 2005 ALCS game. I started writing again, and I wrote a story about that piece. And I was just, as a Sox fan, when the Sox won the World Series, I just felt that the onus was off of us for all time about the 1919 Black Sox, because that was always the black mark against us. And so I just decided to make this character that got killed in my murder the last surviving team member of the 1919 Black Sox, an unknown who had only appeared in one game. And I took the rest from there and let my imagination run wild.
Yeah, and like I said, I can't wait to get my hands on the book because I do want to read it, and it sounds fascinating. And, as friends can attest, I don't read much more than, all the news releases that I get for all the teams that I cover. But this looks like a book that when you pick it up, I'm not going to be able to set it down, and that's a good thing. Now, tell our viewers, if you would, please, the book is available for purchase now, am I correct, or is it not?
Absolutely. It's available online at Amazon or here locally. You can actually get the book physically at Changing Hands Bookstore. It's one of the top independent bookstores actually in all the United States. But you can walk into any bookstore, Barnes & Noble, anywhere, Borders, if they're still selling books, and order the book. You can go online to my website and order the book. It's formally due for release on June 14th. It'll come out nationwide in Kindle and ebook reader at that day, and as well as in hardcover. But you can certainly pre-order it right now.
Right. So you can go out to Amazon.com, and if you would please give me your web address.
My web address is first name, last name, PascalMarco.com.
Okay, and I'm going to put that overlay back up there so people can make sure that they have it spelled correct. And I know that I have it spelled correct on the overlay because you checked it over.
That's right.
So it's PascalMarco.com. Earlier in the show, I mentioned that I think that this would be a fascinating movie. And, we'll see what happens. Love to have you come back on here in about 8 months down the road
that'd be wonderful.
When it's on the bestseller list, and and people are approaching you, and movie companies or however that works are approaching you and say, yeah, we'd like to turn this into a movie. And
well, I've gotten a lot of nice reviews on it. I've gotten some great blurbs. Eventually, Brad Thor was able to read the manuscript when I first met him in Fontana at his book signing. Because I was an unpublished author, or an unpublished writer, I should say. I found out later you're not an author until you're published to understand, to learn the vernacular. But he told me, if I ever get it published, let him know, and he would read it, and he did read it, and he loved it, and he gave me a great blurb. And he's a New York Times #1 best-selling author, so I'll let that speak for itself. I hope there's a lot of people out there who will love it, it deals with people in Chicago as well as people here in Arizona, so there's definitely a strong connection between Chicago and Arizona. As we all know, you being a fellow Chicagoan, there's a huge connection between Chicago and Arizona, and I've capitalized on that.
Absolutely. This is Chicago West, and
yes.
There are a lot of just about everybody you run into, they're only from three places in Arizona. Number 1 is Chicago, number 2 is Minnesota, and number 3 is not New York. It is actually New Jersey. So those are the three places that we have predominance that people have moved here from, and it's all good. But I wish you well on the book. Now, I have to ask you this because I'm always a guy who thinks forward, right? And are you already thinking about that next book?
Actually, I have. I've already started writing it. I've decided to continue the story, at least with some of the characters in there, because you'll have to read the book to see which characters move along with it. But I think I've created a couple of interesting characters who reside here in Arizona. One is a Maricopa County attorney who I've termed him as Maricopa County's most ruthless prosecutor. And he's working in tandem with a Chandler homicide detective, former Chicagoan. So they're both former Chicagoans. So I hope these characters will become very popular, and people will want to know more about them in future books.
Yeah, and that is interesting that you're using the Chicago connection again. Just to let you know, Sheriff Joe did spend many, many years in Chicago, but we're not using him in this book. But I had to throw that out there. But I know when I've met Sheriff Joe, and I've had the opportunity of talking to him several times in my career. He actually spent many years there, and he's not really a bad guy. He's actually a good guy. Sometimes he gets caught up because he loves the microphone so much. But
well, the book is apolitical. Sheriff Joe is not in the book at all. He's not mentioned at all, although there are some definitely recognizable names from today's Arizona politicians, and Maricopa County attorney are mentioned in the book. And it deals with a lot of the issues that Arizona is dealing with today in terms of border issues and smuggling and some of the issues that we're dealing with here. And frankly, a lot of the questions that I get asked by people from Chicago when I go back there, they want to know what's going on down there in Arizona. Tell us all about it. And the interesting thing is when people find out I'm from Chicago, they always tell me, well, what's going on back there in Chicago? Tell me all about that. So right. I think I've got two great things going for me: the interesting lives and interesting things going on in Arizona, and the always interesting things going on in Chicago.
And for our viewers, you can pick up the book at Amazon.com, as you heard Pascal mention. Some bookstores around town, some of your larger bookstores, and you will be, before we run out of time here, you will actually be doing a little book tour also, won't you? Book signing.
Absolutely. I start actually this Tuesday night, May 31st, from 4 to 7 p.m. at the Microsoft store in Scottsdale Fashion Square Mall. That's the flagship store for Microsoft. And then we go to California for a couple of days next weekend to a couple of bookstores in Santa Monica and Manhattan Beach. Come back here for our big event, June 11th, 7 p.m. Saturday at Changing Hands Bookstore. Followed up the very next day, June 12th, at Barnes & Noble in Kierland Commons. All of that information is on my website at pascalmarco.com before our huge tour starting in Chicago on June 18th.
And I'm sure you'll be looking forward to get back to Chicago and see the reaction back home.
Just on the phone with my mom this morning. Mom's going to be 90 years old in September. She asked me if we could do the launch in June on my dad's birthday, the anniversary of his birthday, which is June 18th. He would have been 95, and so I can't think of a better day. And she says a lot of people are very excited about me coming there and talking about the book.
Well, look forward to to your success with the book and future books. And I truly appreciate you coming on the show today and talking not only about the book, about Chicago, about the White Sox. We had a lot of things to talk about here, and I think that we could probably go on for hours talking.
Oh, yeah. Always talk about the White Sox. Never loss of words for talking about the White Sox.
And, well, again, I appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it very much.